Imagine living in a world where urgent news travels at walking speed, horse speed, or train speed, and every important decision waits on physical distance. That was normal life before the telephone. The telephone's biggest breakthrough was not the hardware itself. It was the collapse of delay. For the first time, two people far apart could exchange ideas instantly, clarify misunderstandings in real time, and make decisions without waiting for letters, messengers, or scheduled meetings. That one shift changed the rhythm of commerce, government, medicine, and family life. A merchant could confirm prices today, not next week. A doctor could be called at night instead of at sunrise. A parent could hear a distant child's voice instead of reading a letter days later. The word telephone literally means distant voice, and that phrase captures the revolution perfectly: presence without proximity. We now treat instant voice as ordinary, but it was a social shock when it arrived. People had to learn new manners, new business habits, and new expectations of responsiveness. The telephone did not just connect points on a map. It connected moments in time. It made long distance feel shorter, uncertainty feel smaller, and coordination dramatically easier. At its core, the telephone solves a precise engineering problem. How do you take moving air from a human voice and reconstruct that same pattern elsewhere with enough fidelity that another person understands it clearly? Human speech is just pressure variation in air, a complex wave of frequencies and timing. A telephone's transmitter, historically a microphone, converts those pressure waves into an electrical signal that mirrors their shape. The receiving side reverses the process by driving a receiver, or speaker-like element, to create matching pressure waves in the listener's ear. If that conversion is stable and accurate enough, recognizable speech emerges. This sounds straightforward today, but in practical terms it required progress in materials, circuitry, line quality, and noise handling. Early systems struggled with weak signals, distortion, and limited range. Engineers refined transducers, amplification, and line infrastructure to preserve intelligibility over longer distances. The goal was never perfect studio sound. The goal was functional clarity under real-world constraints: weather, wire quality, electrical interference, and imperfect components. That is why telephony engineering often prioritized bandwidth efficiency and speech intelligibility over high-fidelity audio. The miracle was not that it sounded beautiful. The miracle was that it worked reliably enough that society could build institutions around it. The 1876 patent associated with Alexander Graham Bell is often treated as a single heroic moment, but the practical history is broader and more collaborative. Bell's contribution mattered because he secured a patent for a device that could produce clearly intelligible speech at a distant receiver, crossing a threshold from concept to usable tool. But once that threshold was crossed, an ecosystem of inventors, operators, investors, and technicians accelerated development. Better microphones improved transmission strength. Better receivers improved comprehension. Better switching practices improved network usefulness. Better standards improved interoperability. In other words, invention became infrastructure. And infrastructure is what transforms a novelty into a necessity. Within a relatively short period, telephones moved from experimental curiosity to business-critical equipment. Governments used them for coordination. Companies used them for logistics, sales, and operations. Households adopted them for social and practical reasons. The key lesson here is that transformative technologies usually have two births, first as an invention, then as a system. The patent was part of the first birth. The network build-out, service models, and operational disciplines created the second. Without that second birth, the first would have stayed a clever demonstration. With it, the telephone became indispensable. If you strip away style and branding, most traditional telephones share a simple architecture: a transmitter for speaking, a receiver for listening, an alerting mechanism for incoming calls, and a way to specify destination, usually by dial or keypad. The handset format, with microphone near the mouth and receiver near the ear, became dominant because it aligns naturally with human anatomy and conversational posture. The ringer solved a practical behavioral problem. Users are not always actively monitoring the line, so calls need interruption queues. The dial and later keypad solved addressing. A voice pathway means little if you cannot route it to the right endpoint. These components seem obvious now because decades of design converged on them, but each reflects careful compromise between ergonomics, cost, reliability, and user training. Even interface details shaped behavior. Rotary dialing encouraged deliberate number entry, push-button keypads accelerated it. Audible ring patterns and tones became social signals embedded in daily life. Telephony design has always balanced technical constraints with human habits. That's why the familiar phone form persisted for so long. It wasn't frozen by tradition alone. It survived because it worked for millions of ordinary users with minimal instruction, under unpredictable conditions, day after day. Early telephone service used direct point-to-point wiring between locations, which sounds simple but scales terribly. If every user needed dedicated lines to every other user, line count would explode as participation grows. The switchboard solved that scaling crisis. Instead of wiring every pair directly, each subscriber connected to a central exchange where operators manually linked calls. This centralization changed telephony from isolated private circuits into a shared communication utility. It introduced operational complexity, but it massively increased practical reach. Suddenly, adding a user did not require rewiring the whole community. It required one connection to the exchange. Switchboard operators became the human routing layer of early telecommunications, handling call setup with speed and precision. Over time, exchanges connected to other exchanges, and local islands became regional and then national networks. Eventually, automation replaced many manual functions, enabling faster, larger, and cheaper switching at scale. But conceptually, the core idea remained: central coordination converts many possible connections into a manageable system. This was one of telephony's decisive architectural moves. It made universal service imaginable. Without switching, the telephone might have stayed a niche tool for select pairs of users. With switching, it became a general platform for society-wide coordination. Telephone numbers may feel mundane, but they are the addressing backbone that made global calling practical. A telephone number is not just a label. It is routing information interpreted by interconnected systems. Numbering plans had to evolve so that local calls, regional calls, and international calls could coexist without ambiguity. Prefix structures, area segmentation, and country codes all emerged to keep routing deterministic and scalable. Think of numbering as the grammar of telephony. Without a stable grammar, every call would require human interpretation, causing delay, errors, and bottlenecks. With standardized numbering, networks could automate path selection, billing, and inter-network settlement. Numbering also enabled portability of expectations. Users learned that dialing conventions would broadly work across places, even when underlying operators differed. As networks expanded, numbering policy became both technical and political, involving regulators, operators, and standards bodies. Scarcity management also mattered, because number resources are finite within given plans. So number allocation had to balance growth, competition, and long-term viability. In short, voice transmission gets attention, but addressing made scale possible. A network is only as useful as its ability to find the right destination quickly and reliably, and numbering systems made that possible across an increasingly complex world. Mobility was the next giant leap. Fixed-line telephony tied communication to places: home, office, public booth. Radio-based systems began loosening that constraint in the mid-20th century, first in specialized contexts such as ships and vehicles. But early mobile communication was expensive, capacity-limited, and often technically cumbersome. The breakthrough came with cellular architecture, where geography is divided into cells served by base stations, allowing frequency reuse across non-adjacent areas. That design dramatically improved capacity and enabled large-scale personal mobility. The first handheld mobile phone era began in the 1970s, but widespread adoption required decades of engineering, infrastructure investment, and cost reduction. Early mobile networks were analog and had meaningful limitations in quality, security, and spectral efficiency. Still, they proved the social demand. People valued reachability enough to accept trade-offs. Over time, battery technology, chipset miniaturization, and network planning improved the user experience. Mobility changed social norms again. Being unavailable became less automatic. Coordination became more dynamic. Work boundaries blurred. Safety and emergency response improved in many situations. The phone stopped being a place you went to and became an object you carried. That shift redefined expectations of time, responsiveness, and presence. The transition from analog to digital telephony transformed both performance and economics. Analog systems represent voice as continuous signal variation, while digital systems sample, encode, and transmit speech as data. This enabled better noise management, stronger error handling, and more efficient use of network resources. Digital switching and transmission also made it easier to integrate services beyond voice. Once communication becomes software-driven and packet or data-oriented, features proliferate: voicemail improvements, caller ID systems, conferencing, messaging integration, and later full internet convergence. Costs fell as hardware improved and digital infrastructure scaled, making mobile access more affordable across broader populations. Security also evolved, though never perfectly. Digital systems support stronger controls than many early analog approaches. Importantly, digital telephony blurred the boundary between telecommunications and computing. Phones began inheriting computing capabilities, and networks began carrying mixed media, not just voice. This created the conditions for the smartphone era, where calling is one function among many. Yet voice remained central because real-time spoken communication satisfies a deep human need for speed, nuance, and emotional bandwidth. Digital transformation did not kill the phone call. It made phone calls one interoperable component inside a richer communications ecosystem. The smartphone became dominant because it unified communication, computing, and identity in one portable device. Traditional telephony functions, calling, contact management, and alerting, did not disappear. They became baseline features inside a broader platform. Cameras, apps, maps, payments, messaging, and cloud services made the phone a daily control center. But from a telephony perspective, the key insight is continuity through reinvention. People still rely on phone numbers, call setup, and voice pathways, even when interfaces look radically different. A modern call may traverse cellular cores, internet backbones, and software-defined services before reaching the recipient, yet the user experience can still feel like pressing one contact and hearing a voice. Smartphones also changed call context. Users can call while sharing location, viewing documents, or switching to video. Conversations can move fluidly between modalities. This convergence increased convenience but also complexity. Battery dependence, software reliability, privacy concerns, and platform fragmentation all became part of the communication equation. Even so, the social contract remains familiar. When someone calls, they expect human attention in real time. The smartphone did not replace telephony's social role. It amplified it by embedding voice inside a continuous stream of connected activity. Underneath modern convenience sits a layered ecosystem that includes fixed-line systems, cellular networks, satellite links, and internet-based voice services. The Public Switched Telephone Network, or PSTN, historically provided the core framework for global voice interconnection and numbering continuity. Even as technology shifted, integration with PSTN conventions helped preserve universal reach. One number can often connect across different infrastructures. That interoperability is harder than it appears. Different networks have different signaling methods, quality characteristics, and regulatory obligations. Gateways and interconnect agreements bridge these differences so users experience seamless communication. Internet-based voice, commonly known as VoIP, adds flexibility and cost advantages, but integration depth varies. Some VoIP services connect tightly with traditional numbering and PSTN routes. Others operate more like app-contained ecosystems where reachability depends on shared platforms. This is why not every internet call pathway behaves exactly like a classic telephone call. Quality can vary with bandwidth, latency, and congestion. Still, the long-term trend favors convergence, where users care less about underlying transport and more about reliability, clarity, and convenience. The engineering challenge is to hide complexity without sacrificing reach. The user expectation is simple: when they initiate a call, it should work. Beyond hardware and protocols, the telephone reshaped institutions and behavior. Businesses organized around faster decision loops. Supply chains synchronized more tightly. Customer service emerged as a phone-centric function. Governments coordinated services and crisis response with greater immediacy. Families maintained emotional continuity across distance in ways letters could not match. Social etiquette had to evolve too: when to call, how long to ring, what counts as urgent, when interruptions are acceptable. Entire industries grew around these norms: directory services, call centers, telecom regulation, enterprise PBX systems, and later mobile app ecosystems. The phone also altered inequality patterns in complex ways. Access gaps persisted, but each expansion wave, from fixed lines to mobile to low-cost digital calling, reduced barriers for many populations. At the same time, dependence on network access created new vulnerabilities when infrastructure fails or service is unaffordable. Telephony's legacy is therefore not just progress, it is interdependence. Modern societies function on the assumption that people can reach each other quickly. When communication breaks, economic and social friction rises immediately. Understanding that dependency helps explain why telecom resilience, redundancy, and fair access remain public priorities long after the novelty of calling has faded. So what does the future of the telephone look like when the device itself keeps dissolving into other tools? Most likely, telephony becomes even more ambient, calls initiated by voice assistants, integrated into vehicles, wearables, and workplace platforms, with AI handling screening, transcription, translation, and summarization. Yet the core promise remains ancient and human: clear voice connection across distance. Future improvements will focus on trust and intelligence as much as raw connectivity. Trust means authentication against spoofing, better fraud prevention, and clearer identity signals. Intelligence means context-aware routing, real-time language support, and adaptive quality optimization based on network conditions. Regulation will continue shaping interoperability and emergency access obligations, especially as software-defined communication outpaces legacy policy frameworks. In practical terms, the telephone is no longer one object or one network. It is a function distributed across devices and systems that still depends on standards, numbering logic, and reliable interconnection. If the original invention brought distant voices within earshot, the next chapter is about making that connection safer, smarter, and more inclusive without losing the immediacy that made telephony transformative in the first place. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.